Hello, it's Dr. Driver here. I decided to give you some background on Ishtar and Inanna today. On the discussion board, one student said that the story of Ishtar seems to come out of nowhere in Column's retelling, Padrach Column, that volume, and that is a fair observation. Column is giving readers a taste of the stories, but he's not going into depth. And what can be reconstructed of Sumerian and Babylonian myth is fascinating, but it's not all of one piece. These stories are all fragmentary, told on what is left of clay tablets from thousands of years ago. The preservation of the Babylonian and Sumerian stories is due to the library built by the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal, who reigned in Nineveh, an important city in Mesopotamia in 668 BC. This is in modern-day northern Iraq. This king sent scribes to copy texts throughout his kingdom on clay tablets, some of which we still have. The New Yorker article posted on Blackboard talks about how these clay tablets came to the British Library in London. The reason so many tablets were found in one place is that they were the remains of a renowned library, that of Ashurbanipal, a king of the Neo-Assyrian Empire in the 7th century BC. Ashurbanipal was interested in Sumerian literature. The Sumerians were non-Semitic people who occupied Lower Babylonia about 3500 BC. The Greeks borrow one myth, and possibly more, from the Babylonians, the myth of Adonis, who is Tammuz, from which comes the idea of rebirth. Tammuz is a beautiful young man who dies, and the goddess goes to the underworld to find him. And this is the reason for the seasons of the year. The story of Ishtar's descent into the world of the dead describes her hunt for Tammuz, also known as Dumuzi in Sumerian. Both of these, Tammuz, Dumuzi, are close, and they both represent the god of vegetation. Column starts off his text by telling us that in the beginning, as in other things we've read now, there is chaos, here called Tiamat, and Apsu, the primeval, the first one. The gods just then come into existence. Tiamat rouses the ancient monsters against the gods, and the hero Marduk then fights Tiamat, breaks apart her body, and from it makes the sky and the earth and creates humans. And then he gives a bit of the story of Gilgamesh. Gilgamesh is one of the oldest known texts preceding the Old Testament by 2,000 years. So it's 2,000 years older than the Bible. Gilgamesh is dated somewhere between 2750 and 2500 BC. Homer, author of the Iliad and the Odyssey, composed between 1200 and 800 BC. The Bible was first written around 400 BC. Gilgamesh precedes Greek myth. The name of a king called Gilgamesh appears in a list of kings compiled about 2000 BC, and he probably lived in the first half of the 3rd millennium BC. For at least 1,000 years after his death, poems were written about him in various Mesopotamian languages. The story of Gilgamesh is fragmentary, cobbled from various story sources that survive a patchwork of texts created at various times and places, in what are slightly different but related languages. So his story is told over hundreds, thousands of years. Gilgamesh is the Aryan king of Erech, that's the name of his city, who is restless. His mother, Ninsuna, is a temple priestess and a goddess. We are told that Gilgamesh is 2/3 immortal and 1/3 mortal. How that works out genetically, I don't know. And his mother tells him that because of this, he must die. Death is no pleasant place. This is from Column. The dark abyss of the dreadful goddess Erkala They who dwell there are without light. The beings that are there eat of the dust and feed on the mud, and they look like birds. They're covered with feathers. Gilgamesh imposes too much work on his people, so the gods intervene. The goddess Araru makes a man of clay with her spittle in the likeness of the god Enu, who is the sky god in ancient Mesopotamian religion. He's the ruler of the universe. His body is covered with hair. This is Enkidu, who is created by the goddess Araru. His body is covered with hair, and like an animal, Enkidu lives in forests among the wild beasts, and he's described as mighty in stature, invincible in strength. A hunter sees Enkidu releasing a gazelle from a trap and notices Enkidu also fills up his earth pits and destroys his traps. Worried about their livelihood as hunters, the man and his father plot to draw Enkidu away from the forest. Then we have the story of Ishtar, the goddess, propositioning Gilgamesh. Ishtar basically comes on to Gilgamesh, and Gilgamesh points out she's killed her previous lovers, including Tammuz. He says to her in the column version, "Destroyed are all the men whom thou hadst to do with." And Gilgamesh rejects her. The New Yorker actually is quite good on this, does a little bit of summarizing, also partly from Sanders' translation, which I assigned to you. Gilgamesh takes a bath, he puts on clean clothes, he shakes out his long hair, and when Ishtar sees him, she's dazzled and calls out to him, proposing marriage. She says, "Grant me your fruits, oh, grant me." She will give him all these gifts, and will multiply his animals, his ewes, and his goats. And then Gilgamesh asks, what will it profit me if I marry you? And he says to her, "You are a brazier that goes out in the cold. You are a door that lets in the wind, a palace that collapses on top of its warriors, a water skin that leaks, a shoe that pinches the foot. The men that you loved, what has become of them? One has been turned to a frog, another to a wolf." Then he says, "No thanks." This is also outlined in the Sanders book from 86 to 87. In revenge, the goddess creates a fire-breathing bull and sends it to the city of Erech to destroy Gilgamesh. Or, alternatively, in the Sanders translation, she asks her father for the bull of heaven, which is capitalized and a very scary animal. Meanwhile, the hunters bring a woman from the temple. This is actually a temple prostitute, though column doesn't say this. They bring this temple woman to the forest to seduce Enkidu. Her name in other texts is Shamhat. She's brought to the water. Oh, this is Enkidu. There he is. Pretty fun. This is Enkidu with Shamhat, and she's a temple prostitute. Temple prostitutes were devotees of the local fertility goddesses, and they were respected in ancient society. So Shamhat is brought to the water hole that Enkidu frequents and sits beside it. Column has her just sitting beside the pool where the animals drink, plaiting her hair. That means braiding her hair. That's on page 57. And says that Enkidu, this is column still, astonished by her beauty, is easily led off by the woman where they stay together for 5 days. He doesn't go into any detail. Sanders, in her translation of Gilgamesh, has the hunter say, quote, "Woman, make your breasts bare, have no shame, do not delay, but welcome his love. Let him see you naked, let him possess your body." That's on page 64. And a bit later, quote, "For 6 days and 7 nights they lay together." The New Yorker version is even more kind of jazzed up. Basically, Enkidu comes to the pool, Shamhat spreads her legs, and he instantly succumbs. And this is a quote, with what must be the most robust erection in literature, he engages Shamhat in an uninterrupted act of coitus for 6 days and 7 nights. Then he gets tired, and Shamhat takes him to a shepherd's encampment. For the first time in his life, he eats bread. He also drinks 7 goblets of beer, and he starts to sing. And there was a tablet that's been more recently discovered. It was found in 2015 by archaeologists. This tablet says that Enkidu and Shamhat had not one but 2 week-long sex acts. After all this, Enkidu visits the beast, but they run from him because he has the scent of the woman on him. The woman leads Enkidu back to Erech, the city of Gilgamesh. Maybe it's Eresh. Gilgamesh and Enkidu then get together to slay the bull of heaven. And this is from a cylinder seal. We still have many of these items. They were carved into semi-precious stones and then rolled out in clay to tell the story. So it's really the first moving picture. It's a cylinder seal. And here we have Enkidu and Gilgamesh killing the bull of heaven, who seems to have a human face here. After they kill the bull, Enkidu tears the flesh from the bull and throws it to Ishtar, which is a slap in the face for the goddess. And she and her temple women mourn over this. Gilgamesh and Enkidu become close friends and, quote, loved each other exceedingly, unquote. In all the texts that survive, their love is celebrated, but they are best buds, not lovers. And these texts are not shy about sex, though Column omits that totally. I also posted a video on Blackboard about cylinder seals. I think it's 3 minutes long, but it shows you what those beautiful things are and how they can be rolled out onto clay or wax to show the narrative. And many of these cylinder seals do show Gilgamesh and Enkidu. Enkidu then has a terrible dream, sickens and dies. Gilgamesh mourns him and then asks his mother how to escape death in the short version, the Dr. Driver version. Ninsuna, his mother, sends Gilgamesh to meet Uthpishtim, who is basically Noah. The story of Noah's flood is one of, I believe, 600 flood myths in early cultures, which seems to suggest at some point there was probably a flood. His story is told on tablets in the temple. Now, this is fictional, so the story of the flood is told on a tablet that's discussed in the story of Gilgamesh in the temple. The gods decide to destroy everyone except for Utpishtim and his family. And like Noah, he builds an ark and brings on pairs of animals. Well, he's missing sort of, well, right, he's right in the picture, and then we've got a little bit of his flood tablet over here. You can see how it's worn away and how some of the words are gone. He builds an ark. He brings on pairs of animals and birds. He sends out 3 birds, a dove, a swallow, and a raven, to determine if there is dry land yet. And when he and his wife come back to land, they thank the gods, especially Ishtar, and he and his wife become immortal, not like Noah. Gilgamesh then travels to Mount Mashu to meet Utnapishtim because he wants to know the secret of immortal life. Gilgamesh encounters the scorpion men, travels through a dark cave, and then comes to a garden of the goddess Saduri Sabatu beside the sea. In this garden is the tree of the gods, which the goddess guards, and it has beautiful fruit on it. She's sort of it's Edenic. It's like the Garden of Eden almost. The sea that she sits beside actually is the waters of death. Sabatu says that Gilgamesh must cross the waters of death by means of a ferry, a boat guided by a ferryman, like Charon in the underworld in Greco-Roman myth. The trip to Utnapishtim takes 50 days. Gilgamesh then sleeps for 6 days, eats bread, is told of a plant that gives immortality, finds the plant, but while Gilgamesh is bathing, a snake eats the plant, and Gilgamesh has a vision of Enkidu, who tells him of the land of the dead. And that's the end of Column. At the end of Sanders' Gilgamesh, we get the fact that Gilgamesh himself had all this written down, his story of Enkidu and his mother and the temple prostitute and the hunters and everyone. Gilgamesh himself had all this written down on tablets, including the story of the flood. The last chapter in Sanders' edition describes the funeral of Gilgamesh, which is another fragment from somewhere else. It wasn't found with some of the other tablets, with the laments of his people, but it doesn't really talk about how Gilgamesh dies. The next section of Column talks about Ishtar's descent, which is one of my favorite stories. Ishtar wishes to seek her lover Tammuz in the land of the dead, so she enters the realm of Urkala. Here's a gate. This is the Ishtar gate, actually. This is in a museum, and this is a real thing. This is not a gate of the underworld. Anyway, she enters the realm of her sister, Urkala, who's also found in the related other stories about Inanna. Urkala here is described as a lion-headed goddess who oversees the dead, and there are 7 gates that Ishtar must enter. At each one, she has to give up something. First her crown, then her star. I'm very fond of her star. You can see it up here on the upper left on this carving. Her bracelets, her shoes, her veil, her robe, her garment, and it symbolizes the stripping away of worldly things that happens in death. And to me, it reminds me of the 15th century morality play, Everyman, in which every man encounters death and he has to give up things one by one until he finds that all he can bring to heaven with him are his good deeds. With the death of Ishtar, the world dies and none of the animals mate. Quote, this is Column. None sought the women in the temple of Ishtar. The women of the temple did not call to the men who went by. So you get an idea of what the women in the temple were doing. This is on page 69 of Column. The gods then decide to bring back Ishtar by sprinkling her with the water of life. Then the watchman at the gates returns all of her worldly possessions along with her star, and she leaves the land of the dead sadly. She's really been brought down, but when she returns to the earth, her joy and all fertility return. So that's the happy ending there. Now, with Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, this is a Sumerian legend, and Ishtar and Inanna are the same goddess, essentially, but in different cultures and at different stages of development, or in the human story. To confuse things further, Ishtar is the Akkadian name for the goddess Astarte, or Astarte, I guess, who came out of Semitic culture. Inanna in the Sumerian myths is identified as Ishtar too, although it's unclear whether Inanna is Semitic in origin. There's a family tree in the book that was translated by Volkstein, who's actually just a storyteller. Well, she's a good storyteller. And the gentleman who translated with her, whose name is, I forget, my book's over here, he's the scholar. He's the one who made the transcriptions, and she kind of shaped them into story. But there's a family tree, a genealogy in that book that shows Inanna as the child of the moon god and goddess with her husband Dumuzi. And you'll also see the name Gilgamesh there, who is Inanna's brother. Okay, so these stories precede the Old Testament by 2,000 years. We've got Inanna here in the Halupu tree, if you can figure out what's going on. This is from another rolled out cylinder seal where we see the clay, the story kind of in clay. It describes at the beginning of creation, Erishkigal, the queen of the great below, is given rule of the underworld. Enki, the father of wisdom, sails for the underworld, is caught in a storm. That's the beginning of the story. And then it shifts to a tree, a Halupu tree, which is a willow tree, is planted by the Euphrates. And the Euphrates is a river that still runs through Iraq, Turkey, and Syria, which is where these stories were told. Cradle of civilization. Inanna takes this tree and plants it in her garden, but her tree is infested with a serpent and an Anzu bird, which is a bird of prey, probably an eagle, but it also might mean vulture, and with the evil spirit of Lilith, whom you might know about. Inanna wants the tree so she can build her throne and bed out of it. She calls on her brothers to help. The sun god Utu turns her down, but her brother Gilgamesh helps her get rid of the snake, the bird, and Lilith, who are living in her tree. Gilgamesh puts on his armor and takes his axe and strikes the serpent. The bird flies off and Lilith flees to the mountains. From the tree, Gilgamesh carves a bed and a throne for Inanna. She rewards him, the text tells us, with a puku and a miku, whatever those are. The explanatory text says we don't know, but these are emblems of kingship, so maybe an orb or a staff or something. We don't know what those things are. In the next story, Inanna and the God of Wisdom, I'll just put this on for fun. The story opens as Inanna, again described here as the Queen of Heaven, is admiring her vulva, or her crotch, which is, quote, wondrous to behold. She goes off to eat cake and drink beer with Enki, the God of Wisdom, who is also her father, who knows the me, which loosely means the ethical code or the rule or the law of heaven or earth, or maybe it just refers to energy. Enki gets very drunk and gives Inanna many me, including some that might seem surprising. He gives her a priesthood, throne, crown, okay. I mean, he is a god. But then also art of lovemaking and even the kissing of the phallus. She accepts all 14 me from her father, and there's some great poetry here. I should dig out my book. Hold on 1 second. Samuel, what's his last name? It is Kramer. All right. So here's the poetry. Read a little bit of that since this lecture is going to run slightly long. Oh, you've got to check this out. Please have this book, Inanna, Queen of Heaven and Earth, translated by Volkstein and Kramer, because they actually give you pictures of the original cuneiform script for these laws. I'll just read a little bit of it. She says, he gave me the art of forthright speech. He gave me the art of slanderous speech. He gave me the art of adorning speech. He gave me the cult prostitute. He gave me the holy tavern. He gave me the holy shrine. He gave me the holy priestess of heaven. He gave me the resounding musical instrument. He gave me the art of song. He gave me the art of the elder. He gave me the art of the hero. He gave me the art of power. And it goes on. It's pretty wonderful, actually. Great to read aloud. You might not know what a fuller is on page 18. That's someone who prepares wool. He gave me the perceptive ear. He gave me the power of attention. He gave me the holy purification rites. He gave me fear. He gave me consternation. He gave me dismay. He gave me counseling. He gave me heart soothing. Okay, well, it does go on, but it's quite beautiful. Anyway, when Enki sobers up, he wants his me back and tries to block the return of Inanna, who's sailing with the me on the boat of heaven. She arrives home finally, and she gives the me all the laws and rules of heaven and earth to the people, her people of Sumer. And that's discussed a little bit on page 26, if you have your book. Where is this? Yeah. Inanna brought the me. She brought allure. She brought the art of women. She brought the perfect execution of the me. She brought the tigi and the lily drums. She brought the the beze, and the ala tambourines. They seem to have had harps, tambourines, and drums in these early cultures. Okay, getting on to the next story. Courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi. This is essentially the same story as Ishtar and Tammuz, but told differently. First, Ishtar talks with her brother, the sun god, Utu, who suggests that Dumuzi, the shepherd, might be a good bridegroom. But Inanna is more interested in farmers. She is also an earth goddess. And there's a lot of innuendo in these verses that you have to read to figure out. For example, let's see, what have I got here? Well, their heads are missing. Sorry, not the best slide. Anyway, this is Inanna and Dumuzi without heads. But you can look this up on Google Images where I got it. Anyway, the innuendo. Utu tells Inanna that, quote, Dumuzi will share his rich cream with you, for example, unquote. But Inanna's not really interested in Dumuzi. She likes the farmer. Then Dumuzi woos Inanna with various gifts and tells Inanna they are equals. His parentage is as good as her parentage, and they have a quarrel. And from this quarrel comes, quote, the lover's desire. Dumuzi comes to her house, and she sings a song talking about her vulva again. Quote, my vulva, the horn, the boat of heaven, is full of eagerness like the young moon. My untilled land lies fallow. There's a lot of metaphors here. And then she says, who will plow my vulva? And Dumuzi replies, I, Dumuzi, the king, will plow your vulva. Okay. The poetry here sounds rather like the biblical Song of Solomon or Song of Songs, which is essentially a love poem, and it's very physical in its descriptions. Rather unusually, though, Inanna compares her lover to lettuce. He's kind of juicy and watery like lettuce. Interesting. And calls him her honey man. He celebrates her breasts and her, quote, broad field, unquote. She says to him that she will drink his fresh milk. Well, they call each other brother and sister as terms of endearment. They aren't brother and sister. But there's a lot of erotic verse here that's worth reading. And then Inanna sings, my lord Dumuzi is ready for the holy loins. The plants and herbs in his field are ripe. Oh, Dumuzi, your fullness is my delight. She then calls for her bed and tells Dumuzi, her bridegroom, that the bed is ready. She's very in charge on her wedding night. And she says things like this. Oh, this is descent. I need to go back. Oh, crap. How do I get back? I have no idea. I'm not going to go back. I'm just going to, oops. There we are. Okay. Yes. This is the wedding night. He stroked my pubic hair. He watered my womb. He laid his hands on my holy vulva. He smoothed my black boat with cream. Wow. Inanna then tells Dumuzi all the things she will give him. She will be his leader, his armor bearer, his advocate, his inspiration. She will make him king. She will do all these things for him. Then the servant of the shrine leads Dumuzi to, quote, the sweet thighs of Inanna, and she is granting through this act not only her loins, but kingship and the crown. He will be both farmer and shepherd. And she says, under his reign let there be vegetation, under his reign let there be rich grain. The king then, quote, opened wide his arms to the holy priestess of heaven. And there's more description of lovemaking. On pages 48 and 49, quote, my sweet love, lying by my heart, tongue playing, one by one, my fair Dumuzi did so 50 times. Okay, then we come to the descent of Inanna. Inanna leaves all her temples to descend to the underworld, taking 7 me with her. She dresses up and puts on jewelry and a little makeup and tells her servant Ninshubar, takes her servant Ninshubar with her. And before Inanna goes, she asks Ninshubar to ask the gods for help if she is killed in her descent to the world of the dead. Okay, and this is a cylinder seal where you actually see Inanna with her servant, leading her servant, and talking to the porter at the gate. In this story, Ereshkigal is the sister of Inanna and queen of the underworld. And Inanna says she's come to attend Ereshkigal's husband's funeral. The husband's also called the Bull of Heaven. In this story version, Ereshkigal decides to bolt all 7 gates of the underworld, her servant asking Inanna to take one thing off at each gate. So we've seen that before. She faces Ereshkigal, who fixes, after she's taken everything off, she's made it through the 7 gates. She faces Ereshkigal, who fixes Inanna with the Eye of Death, strikes Inanna, and turns Inanna into a corpse, like, quote, a piece of rotting meat, and she was hung from a hook on the wall. This is on page 60. The servant of Inanna, Ninshubur, goes to all the temples and asks the gods to help Inanna. Only Enki, god of wisdom, is grieved and helps by fashioning a creature from the dirt of his fingernail called a kagara, and another called, oh my god, what happened to this page? Another called, wait, it's here somewhere. The page, oh, here. A galatur, a creature. These are creatures that are neither male nor female, and they remind me of the golem in Hebraic literature, a piece of clay given life, but it's not really alive. These are given the character of professional mourners, and they fly to Ereshkigal, who is sterile, but she's somehow having birth pangs. She's the queen of the underworld, the sister of Ishtar. She's the one who's killed her. And they sympathetically echo her moaning. And then they ask for a reward, and the reward is the body of Ishtar. Ereshkigal is described as naked and moaning. And then there's a dialogue between Ereshkigal and the creatures made by Enki. Anyway, they get the body of Inanna, and they sprinkle the food and water of life on her corpse, and she revives. As Inanna is leaving, she's accosted by the judges of the underworld, the Inanna, who say she must change places with someone else in order to depart. She is also tormented by the Gala, the demons of the underworld, who cling to her. They are destructive and know no food, no drink, no lovemaking, no sweet children to kiss, and on and on. So they're negative. They're kind of a negative force. The Gala first say they will take Inanna's servant, Ninshibur, in her place, but Inanna does not allow it. She calls Ninshibur her warrior who fights by her side. The Gala then asks for Inanna's children and finally for Dumuzi, who in his greatness has forgotten all of his gifts have come from Inanna. He doesn't even acknowledge Inanna when she appears before him. At the end of the story, pursued by the Gala, Dumuzi prays to the god Utu, and he is transformed into a snake so the demons can't hold him. Then Dumuzi has a dream that he's died, and he calls for his sister, Geshtanana, my sister who knows the meanings of words and can interpret dreams. And Geshtanana says this dream basically foretells his and her own death. Dumuzi will be overcome by the demons, the Gala, again. Dumuzi then tells Geshtanana to rush up the hill because the Gala are coming, and he also tells his friend this. Anyway, Dumuzi hides, and the Gala come to the house of Geshtanana and ask where Dumuzi is. When Geshtanana will not tell, they torment her, quote, they tore her clothes, they poured pitch into her vulva, unquote. Then they go to see Dumuzi's friend, who tells them exactly where he is and accepts their bribes. So he's caught again. Dumuzi once more calls on Utu, this time to transform him into a gazelle. This works for a while, but then Dumuzi is caught and killed. Dumuzi was no more, the text says on page 84. And then we get the return. Well, this is just a little picture of the courtship of Inanna and Dumuzi again. In the return, it opens with the description of the laments of Inanna over the death of Dumuzi, and then Inanna's own lament, the lament of Surtur, the mother of Dumuzi. So it was also called the wild bull. So there's a lot of wild bulls in these stories. So we have Inanna and the mother of Dumuzi mourning. Geshtanana wanders about the city mourning, saying she is both his sister and his mother, and that she will share his fate. Then a holy fly turns up and buzzes around Inanna's head. It says, if I tell you where Dumuzi is, what will you give me? And so Inanna allows the fly to, quote, frequent the beer houses and the taverns, among other places. This is on page 88. Inanna finds Dumuzi weeping by the edges of the steppe by a raleigh at the edge of the underworld. Inanna then grants brother and sister, Dumuzi and his sister, Geshtanana, immortality and mortality. Dumuzi will spend half the year in the underworld, and then his sister, Geshtanana, will spend the other half. Inanna also reconciles with her own sister, the awful widowed Ereshkigal, praising her. Okay. And then we come to the 7 hymns of Inanna, and the commentary says that these celebrate Inanna as the goddess of love. This is on page 169. It's thought that the hymns were prepared for the consecration or dedication of temples or statues, or were performed at festivals, and we do seem to get a little bit of insight into the actual religious practice. The first poem, The Holy Priestesses of Heaven, seems to indicate Inanna is both sun and moon, queen of the heavens, just like Isis is the main goddess in the Golden Ass. The poem called Loud Thundering Storm, you get the same idea. Inanna is venerated above all the gods, quote, supreme among the heaven gods, unquote. She is earth and moon, storms, love and war. And the people of Sumer are held in her holy yoke as her servants. But this hymn is missing about 50 lines, say the notes. The Holy One is particularly interesting. That's on pages 97 to 99. And it recovers something of the ritual worship of Inanna, which includes making music with harp, drums, timpani, which are more drums, and tambourines, and parading before the goddess, who might have been a statue of the goddess or might have been a high priestess in the temple representing the goddess. Here, Inanna is called the first daughter of the moon. There is also mention of the male prostitutes who comb their hair before her. Interesting. And the righteous walking before the goddess, rather like the ritual described in the Golden Ass. This song also seems to suggest that both men and women cross-dress or dress androgynously. Quote, the women adorn their right side with men's clothing, and, quote, the men adorn the left side with women's clothing. That's on page 99. There are competitions with jump ropes and colored cords. Young men carry hoops, maidens and priestesses carry the sword and the double-edged axe. This is also cross-gendering, showing the feminine in the man and the masculine in the woman, embracing both sides of the self. Then, quote, in the heavens, the Holy One appears alone, unquote. I'm not sure, but I think that's probably a reference to the moon. There's another series of poems that are kind of linked. The Lady of the Evening, the Lady of the Morning, and the Lady who Ascends into the Heavens, which again seem to be animist in nature. That is, they seem to be worshiping the moon. We have in the Lady of the Evening, once evening begins, the text tells us the young man makes love with his beloved, and the people parade before the goddess. In the morning, she appears, Inanna appears, and it has almost the same, this one has almost the same refrain as the Lady of the Evening. And then the Lady who Ascends to the Heavens describes the worship of Inanna, where she is described as, again, the lone star, through offerings of incense and sheep and dairy products, like cheese, probably in honor of Dumuzi. There were also alcoholic libations. Quote, they poured dark beer for her. They poured light beer for her. Dark beer, emmer beer. And I looked up emmer beer. Emmer is a grain. It's an ancient relative of wheat, and emmer is still used today to make beer. So they offer the goddess beer, wine, and something called gug bread in date syrup, whatever that is. The last poem, again, seems to be a replaying of the sacred marriage rite of Inanna and Dumuzi. And it seems to be some kind of weird ceremonial hymn. And it explains something about the rituals that have to be completed by New Year's Day, which is interesting, the start of the new year. We're told that on New Year's Day, a sleeping place for Inanna is made, and that the me must be perfectly carried out beforehand. The people make a marriage bed for Inanna and Dumuzi, with rushes cleansed with cedar oil. And then Inanna bathes herself, and Dumuzi and Inanna go to bed. He enters, quote, her holy vulva, causing Inanna to rejoice, unquote. This may have been some kind of ritual mating ceremony, though who knows. Certainly seems like it. The people then enter the king's great hall, bringing offerings of food, burning incense, and performing laving, which means washing, right? So they're bathing, apparently, in groups, while musicians play instruments, one of which is stringed. So that suggests a harp. So that's what I've got on these stories. Kind of interesting stuff. Very, very ancient. Oh, here's Ishtar again with her star, which is her emblem, really, from a carving that's ancient. Okay, that's enough of this for now. I hope you learned something else or something more, or this might have clarified some things for you. Bye for now.